Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
It's showtime.
Indeed it is. It is showtime. Welcome in. It's a special edition of On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. It is the morning after, and then there's all kinds of descriptions that we could apply to the federal election that unfolded in the past month, and the results came in late last night. In fact, they're still counting, but thought it was necessary to get the crew together. So we do have Keith Leslie, who was up late last night doing his commentary for CH Television. Kathleen Wynne is here, former Premier of Ontario, who felt the compunction to get out and door knock last night just to relieve a little bit of stress as the results are coming in. Tim Hudak is here. He's a partner at Council Public Affairs and former leader of the PC Party of Ontario. And John Wright, who probably hung in there longer than anybody else because he was on the set at City TV last night with Ms. Mulligan doing the commentary and the way things were playing out. And so let's just get this one out of the way, John, because the first thing I heard, and everybody was texting me, holy shit, the polls were wrong again.
Yeah, well, you know what?
They do.
You
You
actually email in that tone?
Tim.
I want to use that one from time to time.
Is that capitals or what is it?
You know, I always have to split this into two parts, and that is talk about the polls and talk about the seat aggregators. So most, except for one polling company, they don't predict how many seats are going to be. So we went from, I think last time I looked, with the average was sitting at about 42.39 to 43.41. I mean, okay, so it's not a bullseye, but it's within a certain range, and there you go. But the real issue here has been and continues to be the aggregators who take the 14 public opinion polls. And as I said, the polling companies don't do the seats. But if you believe the aggregators last night, the Liberals were supposed to get between 188 seats and 192 seats. I talked to CTV, their modeler, on, I think it was Sunday afternoon, and he said they couldn't get them any higher than 177. That would be their ceiling. So, I mean, I think that the polls overall, on an average were okay, but there were some with a spread of almost, 5 to 7 points. Okay, so that's the first thing. They could have done better, but they didn't blow it out. I think the aggregators who do the seat models, certainly there's a lot of scrutiny there because everybody takes a look at them. They judge what it is, and there you go. The third thing, though, was, it's clear that there were some changes in Ontario in the last week. Things tightened up. The 905 Southwestern Ontario certainly did move, and I don't think the polling at that level caught it. But overall, I think most of those of us who were cautious, at least I was, said that it could be a majority. But depending upon how things went in Quebec, Atlantic Canada, and then swept through to British Columbia, it could well end up being, I think I said, a fulsome minority. So I'm not going to dump on the polls this morning. I have every reason to. But I would say that the accuracy was pretty good overall. But, down on the ground, it could have been better. But more importantly, the seat aggregators, these four groups who put out the polling, take all the polls, put them together and publish the seats. It's not a business I would want to be in. And that's why almost 99% of the polling companies in this country don't do it. We used to do it when I was at Ipsos and Angus Reid. We used to do, and we stopped it because, you can get caught out on this. So that's my only comment. I think they could have done better, but I don't think they did.
The other part of this was, I think, harder to gauge based on the advance polling, Tim, because that was a record number of people who showed up. I mean, out of all the people who cast ballots, 7.3 million. It was an extraordinary number. So what motivated those folks to get out there? And then I saw a text from my daughter yesterday, and she was saying, I just got back from voting, and she said, I had a real eye opener. Kid in front of her is voting, and she said he used to be the 9-year-old who used to come and shovel her driveway and cut her grass, and now he's voting for the first time. And she's kind of grinding it through. What motivated him to come out and vote in Nova Scotia? So all of those things. It doesn't matter how good the polling might have been in terms of methodology. There were certain motivations I don't think that it captured, and clearly that happened here in Ontario, even in Atlantic Canada. You saw some funny numbers down there.
Yeah, I'm not going to beat up on the pollsters, right? There's some phenomenon here that caused the results that we had. And I still think we some time as we parse through exactly what drove those votes. First of all, with such high voter turnout, a good thing. You had two very clear and strong choices between Mark Carney, the Liberals' approach, and Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party's approach. It was a high-profile election that motivated folks to go out. John could answer this better than me, but I bet those last-minute deciders are the hardest to predict. The other thing, Dave, that's hard to gauge is the strength of the ground game. And clearly, in many places, including in the GTA in Ontario, the Conservatives got game. Something interesting happened in Pierre Poilievre's riding. We could talk about that as well. That's hard to measure in the polls in terms of your ability to actually get the vote out at the end of the day. But all in all, while I celebrate the voter turnout, and I celebrate we had two very clear, different choices. This fractured parliament at a time of crisis is the most concerned I think I've been, since watching the last Quebec.
I think that's clearly evident. And then when I put the question to the crew there about 3 weeks ago and asked you, would it be better to have a minority or a majority, and every one of you said a majority government, and I think that that's evident. But we got what we deserve, Kathleen, because the electorate is always correct in this case. So we got the minority government. So at some point, it's what we wanted.
Yeah, I mean, it is a minority, and it means that Mr. Carney, who's got, I think, big ideas about what needs to be done in the country, which is good. I think that's a good thing. Is going to have to find some way of getting those things done, because I think that people, while we've delivered as Canadians, we've delivered a minority parliament, that doesn't mean we don't want strong action in terms of the states and in terms of getting our economy in shape. So I think that he's going to need to find a way to work with somebody in government. Whether that's the NDP. I mean, there are 7 seats, and we'll see what Elizabeth May does. I mean, there are seats that I think can be accessed in terms, and maybe it's just a vote by vote basis. I just want to say, just on a human level, I think that the person who I've been thinking about this morning the most is Pierre Poilievre. This is a very tough result for him. The loss of his seat is particularly difficult, and I think it must raise all sorts of issues for him and his family and for his team. So who knows what will happen? Who knows whether he'll stay, whether he'll go, what will happen? But it's tough. It's
we'll come
tough.
back to that in a minute. But first, Keith, what's the first thing that Carney has to do? I have a thought in terms of the strategy, in terms of how do you coalesce some unity or some support within Parliament. My aim would not be south of the border. My aim, if I were Carney, would be Western Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Absolutely. He's got to do something to show some leadership federally that he's willing to basically get a pipeline built through Quebec or some major thing like this. Obviously, he's got to pick a cabinet. He's got to get a budget together, and he's got to pick a first foreign trip. And I think that should be to Washington. I think that, showing respect to Trump in that way would go a long way, and having a face-to-face with him, something Doug Ford never managed, would also be important. But Carney, I mean, he's got a heck of a lot on his plate. He's got an economy to try and turn around and to reset completely with new trading partners. So I think he's got an awful lot of work ahead of him. What's priority number one? What's the first thing? I think, as you say, appealing to Western Canada by showing that the federal government is willing to take some leadership and getting some, critical infrastructure built to get oil and gas to market as it needs to do to other markets besides the United States. So I think that's his priority. I want to just go back just briefly on the polls and actually defend the pollsters other than the seat aggregators, because I thought in all these polls I watch, and I think most people do, you watch the trends. I mean, the numbers themselves are, they're often within the margin of errors. They seem to be on this one. But if you look at the trends, they told us it was tightening up towards the end. And it absolutely did. I mean, it became a two-party race, which I think makes it harder for the pollsters in Canada to model things. But when it became a two-party race, it's almost split right down the middle, the popular vote. so very close. So I think the pollsters told us that. They also told us that the NDP vote was going to collapse, and did it ever? I mean, they were shut out in Ontario, Hamilton, Windsor, London, completely blank. Hamilton Centre, the riding they've held for years, Matthew Green, the same candidate, the former MP, he placed third in Hamilton Centre. That's just stunning. I don't know if the polls captured that down to that level, but they showed it was going to be a tight contest. But the polls did show us that the NDP vote was going to collapse. And I thought, of all the speeches that I've seen posted, I thought Jagmeet Singh's was the most sincere, the most heartfelt, and I thought he played it right away. He clearly admitted he had to leave, and I mean, it was a terrible night for the NDP. But if you look at the counts, I mean, if it ended up that the Liberals do stay in this minority position, the NDP will be able to be in a bit of a catbird seat to negotiate some agreements to keep the Liberals in power, at least for 18 to 24 months, the life of a normal minority government. So it's going to be real interesting. There'll be a group of independents. They won't have much funding. So I think the Liberals will be able to reach out to them with some additional help
just
to get their
kind
support.
of build on that, Tim, I was shocked to see, Charlie Angus's riding. I think it ended up conservative. At one point, it was being led by the Liberals, but the NDP was nowhere in sight at all in that riding, particularly last night. So, and it kind of, that to me was the indicator of where the NDP was going to end up at the end of the night.
My grandfather was hardcore, a New Democrat, CCFer, from the earliest days, always an orange sign on the lawn. He was a union representative in the petrochemical industry in Sarnia. And Dave, he always found sort of the happy warrior, very compelling about New Democrats. He, would have loved Jack Layton. Tommy Douglas was a hero, the Lewis brothers. And Jagmeet Singh, in my view, at the speech last night, I actually saw a bit of it, but never came across as that happy warrior. And then, secondly, I think, to be very crass in the term, that the stink of the Trudeau government actually rubbed off on him. He embraced them for far too long, couldn't get the smell off of him, and people in his own party, motivated by fear of Poilievre and Trump for sure. But I think also disappointed in Jagmeet Singh. When you look at ridings like the Northern New Democrats or the Hamilton area down where I'm from, even, the Welland part of Niagara, they didn't see the champion of the little guy, the blue collar NDP, my grandfather's kind of New Democrats, and they hemorrhaged votes, I think, largely.
Well, John, I keep wondering, and we're hearing all kinds of what ifs, and the future of the party is vis-a-vis the NDP. And I say, without any kind of irony, how long can the New Democrats be new? And last night was an indicator that, okay, it's getting old, guys. So this really needs a reset, rethink. Right?
The old Democrats.
Doesn't have the same ring,
Well, but I think it started, on the morning that the election was kicked off, and we had Jagmeet Singh effectively dividing the speech into two parts, where the first part was, you should elect me because you should thank me, right? And then he went on to an issue. I don't think they ever caught their traction in terms of actually having an issue. And secondly, people are going to be tired of Jagmeet Singh after a while. And the two major parties in this country put together a vision which was compelling and competing for both sides. So they got squeezed out to the margins, no question about that. But I want to come back to one other thing that we haven't talked about, and that was the collapse of the Bloc in Quebec. I mean, there's another box to tick, okay, for pollsters. But, there was a point last night, I have to say, that I was in my pessimistic mood, because at one point, the parties, if you looked at a coalition, I don't want to say coalition, but an agreement between two different parties, it would have been a tie between the Liberals and the NDP, and it would have been a tie between the Bloc and the and the Conservatives. I go to Tim's point as well. I mean, we do have a fractured country. We can't simply say, well, it's business as usual. We have a minority government, and they'll go back and shell all kinds of resources and money and attention on the NDP, and they'll get their support, especially when they don't have a leader. The reality is that we've got fractures in this country. Right away, we had Daniel Smith saying that nostalgia and hockey is not going to keep us together. So it's the banging of the drum for independence. We have some new awakenings that are going to happen in Quebec, because there will probably be a leadership review there, and the Bloc will have to claw its way back. We also have to deal with Donald Trump. And I don't know whether or not, I had a bit of a gasp when Mark Carney brought in the platform with that huge budget, and it was almost kind of a blowback to the Trudeau Liberal days. So I wonder whether or not, I think Lisa Raitt said it best in my view the other day. She said it twice, and that was, if Mark Carney had Pierre Poilievre's platform, people would have felt more comfortable with that. So it's going to be the reconciliation of the two agendas that we've seen and adopted in this country, and then the underlying issue of the country, I think.
So let's get to the question here, and I posed the question, I guess, about 3 weeks ago, and asked you guys what was the likelihood that on January 1st, 2026, we would have different leaders in each of the parties that we had on January 1st, 2025, and nobody thought that there was any possibility, except me, that might happen. Well, here we go. The likelihood that we're going to have a new NDP leader, a new conservative leader, and we've already got a new Liberal leader. Tim, what happens to Poilievre? I know he was all fire and brimstone in the speech. I'm not going anywhere. It's all good, but holy cow, how do you survive that? Considering, particularly because he lost his seat.
Think about that all night in the morning so far. So it is not. It's victory delayed, not denied. In his mind, they actually, are very close on the precipice. The fact that expectations were high but then low, and they perform better helps. So what do I do if I'm Pierre Poilievre? You're so close, right? You are just so close to becoming a prime minister that I would damn the torpedoes and do everything I can to reinforce the strengths you have within the party. I've reached out to some still early, Conservative caucus colleagues. They don't even understand the review process that they may be going under. It strikes me that Poilievre has, a strong base of support across the party structure. It strikes me that if there were a race on a one-member, one-vote basis, if it comes to that for leadership review, it will come to that, that he'll be very successful in that, because the Conservative Party is really a gathering of various tribes. And I think that he has, not across all of them, enough in the party to do well in a one-member, one-vote process to get one more shot. There'll probably be some casualties, including around those around him. I'll have to toss some folks overside. But I think he can win it that way. It comes down to will he have the support of the caucus. He elected, 22 new members. They'll be indebted to him. He had a solid leadership. And there's maybe some premiers, but that's a couple steps away. There's no solid, as far as I know, leader of the opposition within the party to take those reins. So I'm going to double down on what I said to you last time, David, did this pool. I think he survives, despite the loss of the seat, to fight and win.
But let me suggest then, Tim, that the label was the lost Liberal decade. If we look at this honestly, it really is the lost Conservative decade, because they had 4 shots at the Liberals since 2015 and could not make any kind of dent. The campaign rally cry when Harper was running against Trudeau was, he's not ready. And they were probably right in that, but they lost anyway. And over the last 10 years, as much as they tried, the Conservatives proving they're not ready. And we're going to be into another, at least 2 more years. Holy cow. That's got to be hard on your infrastructure in the party.
Okay, so I think we would agree, maybe not. I mean, if he had won his seat, I think there'd be no question that he would continue on, right? So he lost his seat. We'll go through, exactly why that happened, what kind of efforts caused that. There's a significant swing behind the Liberal candidate. His vote actually went up in his riding, but the Liberal vote was a locomotive past him. Let me get back to my point. Dave, I'll turn that on its head. I think the fact that they actually, did toss out Andrew Scheer and O'Toole consecutively will reinforce Poilievre's case for another point. Now is not the time to try somebody brand new. And O'Toole lost really because he had campaigned as the blue Conservative in the leadership, and then reversed to where he actually embraced a form of carbon tax. So he didn't have that kind of support among enough of the tribes of the party to survive. It was reflected in the caucus vote. Well, I think it's
Kathleen
actually a
Wynne,
strength
when we
of
look
Poilievre.
at that, that will be somewhat of a distraction for the Conservatives. And if nothing else, let's agree that we need a strong opposition. So, to what extent does that, sort of weaken that opposition? We want Carney to have vision and be bold, but at the same time be held to account. So, and it will only be the Conservatives right now who hold him to account. If there's a distraction there, he has kind of a lot of wiggle room until they can kind of figure out what to do.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a bit of a vacuum on the other side of the house, and that is advantage Carney, I think. But I don't know, Tim. I mean, when I look at Melissa Lantsman, you don't think she's coming for his leadership? Like I think she's a strong contender, and she's got that pit bull, and she's smart and all these things. And you guys haven't had. You haven't had a lot of women in your history. Neither has the Liberals, but still. Anyway, I think somebody like Melissa
One better.
would. Sorry.
One better for prime ministers.
True. And a good one she was for the moment. But I think somebody like Melissa Lantsman. Anyway, I think it's tough for Poilievre. I don't know the party. I'm not part of the culture. You know a lot more about that than I do, Tim. But the fact that he didn't win his own seat, and the fact that at the end of the campaign, the reason there was a bump in the Tory fortune had to do with removing him from the ads, from the front and center stage. I think there must be people in the Conservative family who think he was actually a problem at the end of the day. Yes, he brought us together. Yes, he was the catalyst for this kind of enthusiasm, but then he couldn't get it over the line because of who he is. Now, can he change who he is? Can he be that person who at the end of the campaign was softer, gentler, less scary? I don't know. I don't know the man, but I think there must be people in the party who would be thinking, he actually was our catalyst, but then he was our problem at the end. And the people who knew him best in his riding didn't elect him. So, and having been somebody who in a sweep the other way, I held my seat. I mean, it's a gratifying thing. And the fact that he didn't, I think
Keith,
it must
Tim
stick.
Houston's on the line here. Just hold on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Houston,
Tim Houston, Lisa Raitt,
Yeah, as Doug Ford said, Houston could have at least waited until the body was cold before he released his I Am Nova Scotian video. So there's definitely some conservative issues there. I think Poilievre, his riding not only was it subjected to that long ballot protest, which I don't, wouldn't affect either the Liberals or the Conservatives. It's just a mess of a ballot. The convoy, going out and supporting the trucker convoys in Ottawa, I think is what cost him that seat. I agree with Premier Wynne's point that while he led the party to more seats and kept it so close in a popular vote, he himself is unpopular. He polls behind the party, which is why, to her point, that he was dropped from the ads at the very end. So he's going to get some serious challenge for the leadership, whether it comes from a Lisa Raitt or a Melissa Lantsman, or from within or without. First, we're going to have to see who the Conservatives will appoint as a House leader, who's going to be the attack dog, holding the Liberal government to account, because Poilievre's going to be outside the Parliament. He's not going to be able to be in there doing that. And so maybe that will give him an opportunity to soften his image, to become more prime ministerial, and let someone else be the attack dog in Parliament. Melissa Lantsman is certainly very, very good at, going on the attack, being very aggressive against the Liberals. And I'm sure there are others in the Conservative caucus that will want to step up and try that as well. Are they ready to challenge Poilievre, given how well he did in the election, despite the fact he didn't close it? It's not there. Minority governments, just 18 to 24 months. That's not a heck of a long time for him to have to bide his time and build up his base again and change his image so he could become more appealable, especially to women voters. I still think, and we've discussed this before, when it comes right down to it, the party had some very solid policies. They managed to keep it as a two-ballot question. Was it Trump or was it the economy and affordability and change? But when it comes right down to it, Poilievre himself got in the way of the Conservatives getting more.
So on
more
that,
seats
then,
and more
John,
votes.
we've talked a lot about what the ballot questions were, and it was affordability, and it was Trump. The more we kind of drill down on this, to what degree is Poilievre actually a ballot question? Well, that Poilievre is actually the ballot question. He became the issue for people who were casting a ballot.
Well, I think he was, and I think part of that reflected in two ways. Number one, how in the back half of the campaign he tried to soften the image. The open collar, standing with his wife, picking up children, trying to, even in the debate, soften up and shed a tear at the end. So I think that has to be recognized, that they were picking up that at the door. And I think in anecdotal conversations any one of us would have had with particularly women, they would have said, he's nasty. I don't want to deal with him. I don't like certain things about the Liberals, but you know what? I don't want to go there. I think the second thing was just the ads that were broadcast in the final 10 days of the campaign. And I'm talking Main Street kind of ads or traditional media ads, which older people would have been watching. He didn't appear in any of the three ads that I saw. I mean, Stephen Harper was there touting Pierre Poilievre. You had a couple of golf guys out calling the Liberals, clowns, and he wasn't there. The last one was a group of senior citizens who were talking about how they weren't able to make ends meet. He wasn't there. So I saw a tactical shift where they themselves probably recognized this. I don't know whether or not, and even last night when I was on set, I got texted by a few people when he was making his concession speech. He said, where was this guy? I mean, he's better tonight. He's extemporaneous. And yes, he's getting the stump speech, but he certainly, sounds better. It got picked up in the polling where certainly, he was behind Mark Carney by about 10 points. And on some of the key attitudinal questions, it showed up too. So I think it was really hard for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives to erase what effectively was about 2 years of hammering away as an attack dog, and then show up in the last 30 days as a mushy puppy who could sort of change their bark. That wasn't going to happen, right? So it did get picked up, and the question now is, what the party itself decides to do, because tone matters, and it was just a really different tone that mattered when Justin Trudeau was sitting behind the desk.
Tone is an issue, Tim, and I think probably the most compelling thing I heard from Poilievre was when he sat down with Deb Hutton last week on News Talk 1010, and they were talking about your kids, right, and the family, and all of those sorts of things. And I listened to that piece, and for a lot of you go back and listen, you can understand what I'm getting at, but he was making eye contact with me in a medium that I can't see him in. I mean, and he had never done that. I thought that was really important. He talked about, an issue that I think a lot of families, a lot of people are dealing with or can empathize with, period. There was empathy in the conversation. And to her credit, I think Deb went a long way to bring that out in him. But it was right there. It was right there. And then as soon as Deb, okay, now tell me about your platform. What in there is going to change an undecided vote was basically her question. And he just lapsed into the rote kind of bumper sticker labels bullshit that I thought, oh man, just go back to where you were, just be that guy. So it's there, but clearly either he doesn't take direction well, or his team just didn't see any value in him being more of a human being.
Yeah. Thanks for saying that. Deb had a great interview with the most human we've seen Poilievre, I think, ever on the stage, and folks can still download that from News Talk 1010. And the way they connected, he talked about his daughter and the challenges that she faces and as a family, and how to support and how to champion those who life deals a tougher hand than the rest of us. The other moment was, as John had referenced earlier during the debate, where he got teary-eyed talking about the people he was no longer able to meet after his rallies and how much he missed hearing their stories. I Yeah, I think it's fair to say that the campaign was too slow in pivoting and too cautious to go off the 2024 game plan. It's not easy, and Kathleen, as a colleague, may have a point of view on this. I don't know if men find it more difficult to be emotional and tend to stick a bit to script. I certainly was guilty of that. Than revealing what's behind the podium. But man, yeah, I still though think we can't underestimate the earthquake that was Donald Trump. And even if Poilievre had been a bit softer off the top, there was so much of the campaign that was just absolutely consumed by tariffs and the existential threat to Canada and so many jobs. And Carney did a great job of seizing that mantle to stand up against Trump, and his resume fit. I'll argue that the last few days of momentum, while the ground game helped, I'm going to say the Conservative momentum the last few days was really fueled by the fact that the Orange Man had disappeared. He had calmed down his tone. He didn't interrupt those last number of days of the campaign, and that helped shift the paradigm more towards change. I ran into a couple of undecided voters that asked me for support that had been going Liberal in the last couple of days, thought maybe it's time for a change. I'll make the case that's the driving part of the momentum.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see, there was conversation just generally about Trump, about the 51st state, but it was almost as if that had become watered down, Kathleen. And as much as, okay, the buzz is up here, and the number of people who said, I just turn it off now. I don't pay any attention to it. So at some point it was, it was a diminishing return, no matter who it was benefiting. And we wanted to get back to, okay, what's in front of me and what do I need to deal with? Now, we're still going to have to deal with it because he's still in front of us, but there was a different tone in terms of our approach to Trump.
Yeah. And I think to Tim's point, the initial part of the campaign kind of baked in that fear around Trump, right? That was the foundation that Carney built his campaign on. That didn't go away, but I agree, it did start to dissipate towards the end, and people started to think about different things. I was doing calling yesterday up here in Simcoe Grey, and not a riding known to be a Liberal stronghold, although Bren Monroe did, she increased the vote count for sure. But, I, on a list that was a marked Liberal list, I encountered people like a gun owner, who had started to, reignite the anger around guns and the Liberal treatment of him and his buddies, So I think because the Trump threat kind of, it didn't recede, but it was quieter in the last couple of weeks. People were thinking about other things, and that kind of brought them back to Poilievre.
Well, Keith, is this a matter of us sort of tuning that out, or is it feeling like, okay, we've got this, we're on a track, we understand what the threat is, but we can see in front of us what our options are for results, our options are for action? Because I got a sense of that too, right? Just provincial trade barriers, all those sorts of things where people were able to look at them and say, we appear to have some kind of strategy and plan to deal with Trump. Our hair's not on fire anymore.
To Kathleen's point, she used the word baked in, and I think that's it. Voters had the Trump thing baked in now. They could actually take a moment or two and look at other issues. And again, I think that's where Poilievre got some attention, because he was speaking to the affordability. He was speaking about housing costs. He was speaking to people directly about, making life more affordable for them. And I think after, the Trump thing is still there. The whole 51st state existential threat is absolutely real. But it's not imminent. It's not going to be today or tomorrow. And we can see, and we've seen even during the course of the campaign, how often and how frequently Trump changes his mind on a whim. He backtracks on himself. So I think this gave voters a chance to say, okay, we've got a choice here. As I say, it was two ballot questions right down to the very end. Was it Trump or was it the affordability and change issue? And I think so many voters took a chance and said, Trump is a serious threat, especially the tariffs, but it's factored in. It's like when the markets, the stock markets factor in things, even though they're going to shake up everybody else, it's baked in already. The markets have factored it in. I think voters factored it in. I think that's why the advanced polls, and it's not really clear yet, but it does seem that the Liberals did better in the advanced polls because they were over 10 days before the actual election. And the Conservatives actually absolutely got more attention on their pocketbook issues during the
So,
final
John,
days
we're
of the
all
campaign.
over the U.S. networks, the first 100 days of Trump. And who would have thought that on the first 100 days of Trump, Canada would have a newly elected prime minister? 1, 2. What does Carney's first 100 days? I realize it's an arbitrary number, but those next 3 months, what is it going to take between now and Canada Day? What has to happen?
I have no idea. All I can say is I just want to go back and say in the campaign, certainly we had in the final days of the campaign, we were reminded through what Mark Carney apparently forgot to tell all of us about what Donald Trump had said during a conversation, which to me, being a bit of a cynic, would say, yeah, he had to remember that and tell people because Donald Trump wasn't anywhere in this campaign near the end, and he needed to remind people that he was actually there. The second thing was the platform itself that came out. As I said, it reminded people with that huge deficit and some of the platform planks that, this was the old Liberals. And so I think to that point, I think Mark Carney, in a way, has to define what Mark Carney is. He's going to have to deal with Donald Trump, and maybe, yes, right, complete coincidence as the Liberals get their minority government, Donald Trump relaxes the tariffs on automotive parts, and they can go, see, already he's responding. But the reality is, Mark Carney, I just thought by the end of the campaign, was kind of more of a Trudeau Liberal than a Carney Liberal. And that's why I don't know exactly what he should do, because at some point we have to, have Mark Carney as the banker leader, whatever you want to call him, fiscal, I don't know yet, define himself. And so the first couple of months are going to be taking those steps. Will he, in fact, embrace a lot of spending in this country and drive up the deficit? Will he, in fact, prove to be an ample negotiator with the man south of the border? Will he get respect? What will be the planks that emerge, especially when that underlying current is about affordability? Will he address that and say, you know what? We have lots of concerns, but the first thing is to cut the capital gains tax, to make more of an investment and have private capital return to this country. He's got some options, but I don't know who the real Mark Carney is. And I think he has to define that for the rest of the country.
Yeah.
Dave, can I jump in on this one? Because I think he's going to need to be very active. I think he's going to need to be seen to be and be doing a lot of things. I think the unifier, this business about one economy as opposed to 13, there already are provinces moving on the trade barriers. I think and that ties into the need to reach out to the West and put some either legislation or some process in place that is going to bring in a conversation with those Western premiers. Maybe there's a first ministers meeting. I don't know, but I think he's going to move quite quickly to demonstrate that he's going to make good on the issues that he raised and demonstrate that bold action is what is needed right now. I agree that the trip to the United States, I think traditionally that has been an important trip. It may be even more important this time around. My guess is, what do I know? But my guess is that's the kind of activity that we're going to see right away. And the other thing is he's going to have to demonstrate with the building of his cabinet that there are some significant changes. I don't know what that looks like, but the cabinet can't reflect what was there before. There's got to be enough change that people say, okay, this is
Tim, it's also in the PMO. I think who's sitting in that office as well is really going to sort of qualify the character of this government in the early days.
And an early punch that landed from Poilievre in the debate was how he talked about the same Liberal staffers, right, who are behind the curtain and off stage. So I think Premier Wynne is right. He needs to have a new cabinet with a lot of new faces. And now that he's quite secure in his leadership of the Liberal Party, to dump those who just are lightning rods, particularly to Western Canada. Number 2 on my list would be to embrace the West. I think he needs to be more clear about where he will go on oil and gas and energy projects. I thought his program there was still too reminiscent of the Trudeau approach. I really don't like where he stands either on bringing in a new border tariff based on his view of carbon policy from exporting countries. I think he should drop that as well, because they were status quo, I think, in Alberta and Saskatchewan. They did not make inroads. So that's an important signal to the West. And then, of course, engage the premiers and go towards President Trump with a unified, as best as possible, negotiating position. But that's going to need some genuflection to Premier Smith and Premier Moe. Last point on this, on a bit of optimism I have. I do agree, majority government either way would have given me more confidence in Canada's future. A bit of optimism is that it definitely looks like Donald Trump's tariff campaign was far too aggressive and unwieldy and nonsensical. So the fact that, the day of our election results, he's backing down somewhat on auto tariffs, I feel more optimistic. I guess I always have that we would land on flat ground. But certainly the door is open to Carney to actually advance in ball even further on the tariff.
Keith, with all of that, I wonder, whether Mr. Guilbeault and that sort of part of that cabinet, the Trudeau cabinet, are going to be the ones that are thinking, what seat am I going to get in the legislature?
They should be wondering about a career as a parliamentary assistant, because they really, really should not be cabinet ministers. And I say this, with all due respect to Chrystia Freeland, a strong, strong cabinet minister, but just way, way, way too closely associated with Justin Trudeau. I think she will be in the cabinet. I don't think she'll be a minister, but she won't be the frontline one. She won't be the one, in charge of the negotiations with the United States, or she won't be finance minister. But yeah, you've got to dance with who brung you. So he's got a lot of former Trudeau cabinet ministers in his caucus. But I think he needs to reach out. He needs to broaden it and bring in many, many new faces, as many as possible. Keep a couple of senior ones, in the pivotal roles. But show us a really new cabinet, a leaner cabinet, and then have a budget that somehow scales back that platform that John criticized when he put out, because it does, just increase so much the deficit. It just balloons. It's just nonsense. But show us in that budget exactly how you're going to finance and help the workers who are displaced by the tariffs, who lose their jobs. That's going to be a real challenge. And how do we get that out? Is it, like during the pandemic, do we just issue checks? Is it, I know the Poilievre plan was tax cuts. Well, that's not going to do it. So he really needs to specify how he's going to help those workers, because we're already seeing workers being displaced. That's going to be, I think, something people are going to watch really, really closely. And that's something we're going to need to see a difference from the previous government. That's where he can put his own stamp on it.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, Tim, yes, there's some movement on the auto tariffs, but the Treasury Secretary is on CNN right now as we speak. And his quote, "I think tariffs will bring back U.S. manufacturing." So the script is really, fuzzy all the way around in terms of what to expect. But to the point everyone's made, that there needs to be a sense that we are taking control of our own kind of, taking control of our own needs and our own issues here on this side of the border, and better prepare ourselves to deal with whatever uncertainty continues in the United States.
Well, we want to be an energy superpower, but we want to know what exactly Mr. Carney means by that, because to most Canadians, that means a pipeline that's going to get oil and gas where we need it to go to get to other markets besides the United States. I don't know if it means that to Mr. Carney.
Well, and Keith, you said the issue about displaced workers. I mean, building a pipeline, doing those things, those are long-term projects, right? Those don't happen overnight, but people lose their jobs overnight. And
yes.
So I think whoever was in the prime minister's seat was going to have to deal with the reality of support for displaced workers. I don't think that's an option. And whether it's retraining or whatever it is, that costs money. So while I hear the concerns about the big budget, the reality is that those costs are there. They're not going away. I don't think the uncertainty that Trump has put in place is going anywhere. And so there have to be supports for people whose lives have become more precarious.
We never got to Jamil Javani this morning, but the crew is going to sit down and do our regular weekly this week for On the Ledge, and perhaps we'll kick around that back and forth, because I'm not sure Jamil wants to be picking a fight with Doug Ford, but clearly he's in the mood for one. So
That's the night he won the election. That's a victory dance.
Exactly.
I hate to see him when he's pissed off.
Exactly.
You know, the only other thing I would say to end this up is that we end up with seven elected members of the parliament who, in fact, have got now the most persuasive position, and that is the 7 NDP members. I mean, all of a sudden, we're back into a minority government, and what could have been running from the left and then governing from the right in some of the fiscal and different financial issues of this country, so that Mark Carney could make some choices. They've got to keep the NDP on side. I mean, they can't ignore them. They also may do what other parliaments have done in the provincial legislature, which I've seen, was kind of say, well, listen, we'll keep you on side by giving you more research money, or we'll do something to make sure that you're okay. This puts us in a different position where you can't just kind of move ahead. You've still got to have the NDP support. And so that'll be interesting to see what kind of leadership emerges, what kind of issues that they are demanding the support on, and where that goes forward, because it's not it's not having a breakaway on the St. Lawrence, that's for sure. In an ice hockey game.
I'll just give a counterpoint. I don't want to quote from Joe Clark's playbook, the greatest demon in Conservative Party history. However, I cannot see the New Democrats want to be anywhere near an election campaign. With decimated, so you can't, I guess, take their votes for granted, but boy, I think you can push them pretty far.
Yeah. I just thought, and that was sort of the second breath everybody took. Oh my God, we could be back in an election in 24 months. What the hell?
Yeah, and nobody wants that.
No,
nobody wants that, and I think that's a bit of a security blanket for the Liberals, that nobody wants to go to an election. I think people would just be furious at whoever precipitated that. I just want to make one comment about the polls, because I didn't answer your question properly at the beginning, Dave, because I got distracted. But I just want to say that aren't we glad that the polls don't know everything, can't predict everything? It really comes down to what people decide in individual ridings. So in York Center, for example, I was out with Yara Sachs. She's a terrific candidate. Roman Babar is what Roman Babar is, but he ended up winning. And, that was because people had a particular antipathy on a particular issue in that riding, which the polling just doesn't pick up, those idiosyncratic ridings. And I mean, it is what makes elections and democracy so interesting and so important, that people go out and actually express themselves. So with all the due respect and love for pollsters, I'm really glad they don't get everything.
I'm feeling the love.
Yeah, and I want to.
Well, it's interesting here. As we wrap this up, it's just before 9:00 on April the 29th. And in past, I would always say things may change by the time you hear this. Things may still change, because they're going to continue the vote count at 9:30 this morning Eastern time at Elections Canada. And to your point, Kathleen, I'm looking at Kelowna, British Columbia. The Liberals have 47.7% and the Conservatives have 47.4%. So, and there's still one poll to report. So who knows how that's going to play out.
Wow.
All right, well, we'll leave it there. This is your special edition of On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. We'll be back at it again in studio Thursday. We'll drop the show as usual on Friday. So thanks to Kathleen Wynne, Tim Hudak, Keith Leslie, and John Wright. Thanks to you for hanging in there, and it's always good to have your comments, your insights, your questions about the show. If you are listening on the podcast apps, make sure that you share it, or you make sure you actually follow the show on YouTube. Yep, hit subscribe, and we end up in your inbox with notifications. So you'll know that when the show drops, it's there for you to watch. And you also get Now and Next. This week, we'll have our cast, our comms and strategy team in studio. And so we'll get their take on some of the comms issues and some of the numbers that may have changed between now and then. All right, that'll do it for us. I'm Dave Trafford. Thanks for listening. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast.
I have a YouTube channel right here, as you can all people see. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content. Look at this. Bye now.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.